I'm Kathleen Dollard, and welcome to this week's webcast on upcoming changes in C#, Visual Basic, and Visual Studio. This series is brought to you by Wintellect Now, with new courses appearing weekly. In this episode, I'll show the new null conditional operator, which has also been called null propagation. I'll show you this feature in C#6 in the Visual Studio 14 CTP3, and it's listed as planned for Visual Basic 14. A similar feature was present in the April preview, but the chaining behavior has changed. Be sure to set the language version to experimental in your project file for all configurations to access C# 6.0 and Visual Basic 14 features. The goal of null conditionals is to make code neater when values might be null. I'll continue with the same project with a customer class and a customer lookup class. The lookup method can return null, and you'll see different ways to access the first name property of the customer when the customer can be null. I'll pass an integer on the command line of a console application and set the command line properties in the debug pane of the project properties. I've copied in a print name tag method that takes the first name and prints the name tag only when a first name exists. If we look at how to solve the problem with C#5 code, I'll set up a variable for the customer, check whether that variable is null, and only call the print name tag method when there is a customer. This works fine unless there's some other reason to call the method. To simulate the many reasons you might be calling the method anyway, I'll increment a counter. Now the calling code becomes even more complicated. I'll set up a string variable to hold the first name and set it initially to null. I'll move the print name tag method out of the conditional and have it use the first name variable, and I'll set the first name variable inside the conditional. You can also solve this problem with the older conditional operator. I find conditional operators to be more readable if you place the operators at the start of new lines. I think the intent here is clear, but this version has a serious downside of calling the lookup method twice. If that method is expensive, this becomes a very bad approach. C#6 offers a better solution. The question mark dot, or null conditional operator, means that if the thing on the left is null, null is returned with no null reference exception. This is such simple syntax that it's readable even when you drop it straight in as the function parameter. I'll continue to use the separate variable because it makes it easier to keep up with what the data types are, and I'm using var so there won't be any implicit conversions. A new refactoring in Visual Studio 14 makes it easy to return to the variable approach. I'll highlight the contents and introduce a local variable with the name first name. Since string is a reference type, its value can be null, so the type of the variable is, predictably, string. What if I create a new variable for the length of the first name? Length is a 32-bit integer, an int, so what's that data type? The result could be an integer, or it could be null if the customer is null. The variable is a nullable integer. The meaning of this line differs depending on whether there is a null conditional operator, a question mark dot, after the first name as well as after the lookup. If there is a null conditional operator and either the customer retrieval or the first name is null, the value is null. If there is no conditional operator after first name, it's saying, there might not be a customer, but if there is a customer, throw an exception if there is not a first name. Details of this chaining changed between the April 2014 build extension for Visual Studio 13 and the Visual Studio 14 CTPs, like the one I'm using now. Microsoft reversed the behavior of a working feature because of community feedback, and the community had a chance to see how incredibly messy language design can be, particularly when the terminology is also being established. Going forward, Microsoft plans to develop languages as openly as possible, even tipping their hands about possible features C# may get in future versions, beyond C#6. In the next episode, I'll show you more about null conditionals.